are now joined by an esteemed group of high-performing leaders. For our next panel discussion with us today, please welcome Nadine Alameh, Chief Executive Officer of the Open Geospatial Consortium. It's great to have you with us, Nadine. And Tom Jones, author, scientist, pilot, and yes, veteran NASA astronaut. Tom, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
And our moderator today is the Director of People here at Evans Consulting, Nicole Anderson. Nicole, it's all yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Russ. So for our next session of today's summit, we are going to transition from best practices and tools to application. We're going to talk with two very impressive leaders with diverse experiences and hear them tell their stories from a boots on the ground perspective. So thank you, Nadine and Tom, for your willingness to be open and transparent today. And we've been talking a lot about healthy organizations, right? It's why we're here. So to kick us off, I'd love to hear from both of you on your perspectives of a healthy organization. Let's dive in first, Nadine, with you. You've had significant experience navigating the many changes over the years in a global environment, and most recently at OGC. So I'm curious, what signs do you look for that are signatures of a healthy team? And what are some of those critical elements? How do you know it when you see it?
So thank you, Nicole, for actually inviting me to be here. I'm humbled to be with Tom, so I'm going to be taking notes. I told everybody I'm very excited. I was taking notes actually throughout. Indeed, I think it's been an interesting couple of years for me, personally, and for everybody on this planet. But being a new CEO for a 27-year-old organization that is a not-for-profit global consortium in a technical field that's booming, it's like adding, one layer of complexity on top of the other. So when you ask about the signature of a healthy team, I think to me, the first thing that pops to my mind is passion. And for a not-for-profit, I think it's almost easy because you usually don't work for a not-for-profit unless you're passionate, right, about the mission of that organization. But that should apply to every organization, right? And so in our case, what makes it more interesting is that the mission itself, we flipped it on its head in the last couple of years. So instead of starting with what we do, that were technical standards, location, it has quickly become about the community, about a community of experts. And again, I think going back to that signature is feeling this feeling of belonging to something that's way bigger than you. And in this case, it's a global community of experts that can actually contribute to disaster response, to pandemic predictions, to climate change. So passion, belonging, I think honestly is what got us through the last couple of years. And maybe those are one of the signatures at least. Helps?
Love it. Thank you so much, Nadine. Tom, I would like to shift that question to you. You've spent your career as an astronaut at NASA, a pilot, as a research scientist, and now a speaker and an author. I imagine you've experienced some very complex challenges with teams in your experience. So what are some of the red flags that you've seen that's kind of tipped you off that a team is unhealthy, or what does a healthy organization look like in your experience? And you're on mute, Tom. If you don't mind just unmuting, we'd love to hear it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for welcoming me to the conversation and the panel discussion today. Yeah, I had 11 years with NASA, and I saw a lot of the amazing things that NASA does. The team and mission control is phenomenal. They helped us up in orbit, and then we had many teams on the space shuttle itself and at the space station, carrying out the scientific work or the engineering work that we had to do up there. Great success with NASA, as you know, for the last 60 years of the space age. But big picture, NASA is a big organization. It's old now, and it's had 2-3 fatal accidents over the course of its history. And those were largely due to organizational dysfunction. And they've been corrected after each one. But remember, when we lost my friends on the Columbia in 2003, that's 18 years ago. And the challenge for an organization is to remember those lessons learned remember the fixes to the problems that we confronted, and then let's go forward with a healthy organization to meet the challenges of the future. And right now that's getting people back to the moon or going on to Mars. I remember one particular incident when I was at the astronaut office, a member of a group of about 130 people with superb talent. They came from diverse backgrounds, but tremendous experience and leadership skills. And yet there were problems in the office. In a particular case, there was a chronic problem with the leadership of the astronaut corps, where they had all these great people working for them all over the planet and in space, and yet they couldn't bring themselves to have an honest conversation with some of the people in their organization. So let's say somebody made a mistake, whether it was in flying or whether it was in a earthbound task or being a member of a team, being a successful member of a team, they failed at that. And when an astronaut failed, the organization was reluctant to go and tell them face to face that they had problems, that there were some fixes that they recommended, and let's see how you do in getting yourself back on track. Instead, they would just let people twist in the wind with no knowledge or insight whatsoever. And so to make a long story short, this created bad morale in the office. We, who had not been part of the dynamic of failure or corrective action, we didn't know what we could do to make ourselves better because we couldn't learn from other people's mistakes because the facts of each individual personnel case, to a degree, were not shared with anybody else. So that was very discouraging. And I saw some very talented people left to wither on the vine, if you will, when they could have been given a nice endorsement, sent out the door to seek a new opportunity. And I think an organization owes its people honest, correct feedback frequently so that you can correct people's courses. If they're off track, you can get them back on course and make use of their talents.
I love that, honest and direct feedback. We hear Brene Brown talk a lot about clear is kind. And I've heard Metal talk about it as well in some of our conversations over the years. And so it just, that's really resonating for me, that clear and honest feedback. It's definitely kind to do that. Thank you for sharing that story. Sure. So Nadine, I'm curious, when you talked a little bit about reinventing the organization, do you mind sharing a little bit more, when you realized you didn't have maybe a healthy organization, you had to start over? Maybe tell a little bit about your experiences reinventing an organization.
How much time do you have? No, so the quick version, I think, first of all, it starts with the reinventing piece, right? So for the sake of, everybody, watching, just thank you for actually watching. The organization, so our mission is around, and our expertise is around location, right? So that's the Geospatial and Geospatial Consortium. So it's around location, so think mapping, think satellite imagery, which years ago used to be a small niche. You have NASA, so I'm again honored to be with Tom. NASA was providing the data. You have the European Space Agency, so there were just a few, right? It was so small, it was really a niche. And now, think about it. We have self-driving cars, that's all location. We were talking contact tracing, that's all location. Space, actually, now we have a booming commercial space industry, right? I mean, think about it so much. Internet of Things, anything, your phones, any wearables, eventually they're tracking your location. So all of a sudden, we call it the genie is out of the bottle. And so we have to reinvent. So it's not a luxury, it's a necessity, right, to keep up with the times. So back to the healthy organization, I think it was very important to sort of understand, or actually maybe I'm thinking embrace, that the reinventing is a journey and that journey takes a team. And I call it, strong, healthy team. And I've been saying, for the last couple of years, we're sort of renovating, I'm calling it, not really reinventing, but you have to do it from the inside out. So we go back to the people, right? And getting them on the same bus with the vision and the mission, and getting the right people in the right seats and the right values. And that's an exercise that's part of the journey. And I think my answer to you here is, it took us a long time to establish trust. I think you mentioned it earlier. And also this acknowledgement that change is hard, especially for people who have been, with the organization for a long time. So what do you do and what can I share is it's important to be open and honest and transparent, and to explain and repeat in many ways why you're reinventing, right? We're reinventing to keep up with the world, to scale, and not for the sake of making more money, right? It's for the sake of having a bigger impact, to accelerate the impact. And I go back when the impact is pandemics and disasters and climate change, that's, I think, brings you back to the power of reinventing with the power of a strong and healthy team.
I love it. Thank you so much. And now you've talked about teams and how important those healthy teams are to build a healthy organization. So let's talk about that for just a minute. Maybe Tom, can you share an example, maybe when you were leading spacewalks at NASA, or from your experience leading teams, what worked well? What was a challenge that you experienced? It's really important for us leaders to learn from each other. So what comes to mind when you think about teamwork?
Well, we had a challenge when I was on my flight to the space station. So I was one of the 2 spacewalkers on a crew of 5, and we had to do a lot of construction work at the space station, and it was going to be very intense, 3 spacewalks outside. And I was training for this for about 2.5 years, and I spent 230 hours underwater in my spacesuit, training in that environment where you're neutrally buoyant and you can make your spacesuit behave in that pool as if it would most of the time in space. So it's a pretty good training environment. And now we had a hand grenade thrown into the situation, because about a 1.5 years prior to flight, we had a personnel problem on our group of 5 on our crew, and one of our crew members was removed from the space shuttle crew. And he was the lead spacewalker. Lucky break for me, right? So now I become the lead spacewalker by default, and I had to step up into that leadership role. I hadn't been planning to, but now it's time for me to show what I can do there. And so we had a replacement crew member brought onto the team. And we had, like I say, about a year on the schedule at that point till launch. It actually stretched out to about 1.5 years. And I had to find a way to bring my friend into the fold, if you will, and make him a productive member of the team right away. Now, he was training for spacewalks as well offline, but when he came in, he didn't know our particular job. One of the things that he was able to do was jump right on the plans for our 19 hours of spacewalking. And we had a first spacewalk to install this big science laboratory called Destiny. And it involved a lot of intensive handwork outside and a critical series of events to connect electrical power and computer cabling and cooling lines to the space station. And the way that Mission Control had planned this was to do it in a relaxed way, to just hook up some temporary heaters to the laboratory and keep it thermally conditioned until we could go back out the next time and hook up all the critical connections. My friend said, let's plan for success. Let's think of what we could do if we do everything right. And he says, we could get the critical cooling lines connected. We could get our electrical power supplied. And that way we could begin the installation and activation of the laboratory on the first day, rather than waiting 2 days later, 48 hours in delay. And that suggestion he brought forward to our crew, and I was able to get it up to, with his help, to Mission Control. And we had a big confab of all the controllers on the ground who were going to be supporting us. Got our friend's suggestion reviewed by all the tech experts, and they said, yeah, we could save 48 if we succeed in anything. And we had convinced them in the swimming pool that we could get through this intense timeline. So we brought my friend Beamer along with his suggestion, and that made him an integral member of the team right away. His creativity had brought him into the team, and he was instantly respected because of his suggestion. And we pushed and promoted that integration as much as we could with Mission Control. So right away, he has his confidence. He's a member of the team. He's producing for us, and we sailed on from there. So he was the best friend I needed on that mission, and friends for life. He really did do something at first spacewalk that he quickly overcame an ammonia leak that saved a $1.4 billion laboratory. So salutes to Beamer, my partner.
I love it. And I'd venture to guess we probably don't have a lot of other astronauts, right? But what I love about on the call here today, but what I love about your story is the application to really any role that we have as leaders, and how some of these lessons learned that you're sharing here can apply to any of us. I love that. Thank you.
Absolutely. You need to look at people for their innate talent and then promote that and make them a contributing member as quickly as you can. And that really worked for us. And I think that's the trait of a good leader is to delegate and not be you don't have to be the font of all the wisdom. You can tap your team to bring that forward.
Yeah, I love it. All right. So when we talk about teams, let's talk a little bit about the generational differences in the workplace. Nadine, how do you handle the differences or how did the differences across the generations impact teams from your experience? How do you account for the various perspectives and needs and motivations of the various generations from Gen Z all the way to baby boomer?
That's an amazing question because it hits at diversity, which is overall amazing for a team. And I really appreciate the first half of the webinar, hitting on women issues, especially, through COVID. So really appreciative because it definitely resonated. So the generational difference, so I'm glad we covered the, diversity, the gender diversity. So the generational diversity, I think now I understand when people used to say, having kids makes you younger, right? Because you learn so much from them. And I have learned so much from my, 2 boys over the pandemic because I was able to observe them literally every day. But the way they learn is different. I mean, these kids don't use books. They have their Chromebooks, right? So everything is electronic. They collaborate on Google Docs. And then you have the whole gaming environments where they strategize with their friends on not necessarily gaming, but all sorts of interactions, right? And it actually tells you that they learn differently, they interact differently, and they almost think differently. So we have to evolve with them. And I think the same applies, at work. The basic assumptions, right, on technologies and the business models, right, and the customer interactions are different with the new generation. And that challenges us big time. For instance, at OGC, one of the changes that we have been pushing is we have to modernize our foundation standards, right? Because times have changed, the programming languages have changed, the use cases have changed, and we were just saying, now the genie is out of the bottle. Everybody needs to use those standards. And we looked towards the younger generation. Like, how would you do that? You cannot do that. You cannot prepare for the next 25 years if you don't bring the younger generation with you today. And that means it has changed a lot of what we do. We used to do things top down, and I think right now it's more like, for instance, for us, the developers are the ones that are driving, the pace and the outcomes eventually. The standards themselves, the technical documents are actually lighter, easier to understand, easier to share. And the way we run projects is way more agile. Again, I think it's influenced by this new generation. So I can go on, but one of the challenges is, it is always a mixed environment because that's how we benefit from each other. And what I've seen is we have always to remind ourselves to be respectful both ways, right? So the younger generation to be respectful of, I don't want to say us older people, but the the older generation, because there's legacy that needs to be respected, and there's operational legacy that needs to be even more respected. You cannot break things. I know Evans works a lot in aviation. You cannot just, introduce things that make, planes start falling from the sky because you're testing something, right? And the other way is, I know they're youngsters, but we also need to respect that this is the way of the future. So I would say respect both ways when it comes to diversity and essentially ensuring a healthy back to the healthy team, right? The healthy organization.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I marvel at some of the tensions that might come up as the different generations work together. Can you talk a little bit about how you navigate those tensions and really celebrate the tensions in order to create those that open, diverse thought and ideas?
I think the easiest thing is to listen. We need to listen to each other, and I don't think we do that enough. But actually listening to what they have to offer, and for them to also listen as to why things have been done this way, right? And also to appreciate this goes back to the respect and appreciation, then to appreciate that we cannot change over time, right? I know you have your own way of doing things. I know we've done things a certain way. Especially I go back to the operational world. The new generation is all innovation, quick, new business models, let's try this, let's start this startup. But at the end of the day, you have to make it run in the real world for a long, long time. And I think just working together, understanding why we're doing this, and it goes back to the common purpose, the common vision, right? And it's not easy. So you have to live with it and try again.
Yeah, I love it. Listen, it's such a simple thing, and it's so easy to forget, right? So thank you for bringing that forward. Now, we talked a little bit about trust earlier and used some examples. Nadine and Tom, you mentioned about empowering your team and delegating, and so I'm just curious. I'm going to ask this question for both of you. Tom, maybe you can start. Just share a little bit more about how do you build that trust, that psychological safety, and really empower your employees.
Oh, well, I have my own experience to talk to that point. I was a member of the shuttle crew on Columbia back in 1996. In fact, it was 25 years ago this month. Just in a few days, we'll have our launch anniversary. Crew of 5 people, and I was going to be a spacewalker. I was going to get to do my first spacewalk out of Columbia's airlock, and we were going to test some techniques for helping build and maintain the space station. So my partner was Tammy Jernigan. She was the lead spacewalker, and so we trained for a year together, and we were ready to go. So we get up to space, and how shall I put this? It was Thanksgiving night, and we were going to go on our first spacewalk, both of us going outside for the first time. And we were in the airlock where you an outer door to go out into the cargo bay and do your work. And Tammy got the go from mission control to turn the doorknob or swing the handle, in fact, the mechanical handle to open the hatch, and it wouldn't move. It was jammed shut. And so basically this is like being locked into your room, and you've got an important job to do on the other side, and you can't get out of the room. And it was incredibly frustrating. I tried to move the handle. She tried it over and again. We inspected it. We did all the troubleshooting. We mission control, but after 2 hours, they said, cancel this walk. Just come back inside and we'll troubleshoot it overnight. So needless to say, we were both very disappointed. And a couple of days later, after a long process of troubleshooting and trying to figure out what the problem was, they figured out that the doorknob was jammed internally, mechanically. There was some kind of debris that was causing it to jam, and we couldn't access that in the vacuum of space. So we had to cancel both spacewalks. So it's a dagger to the heart. It's just a terrible, crushing disappointment to train for a year for what is regarded by most astronauts as the top line job to get to do a spacewalk. And we were being denied that by some simple mechanical failure. So we were both just crushed professionally and mentally at that point. So here's where the trust comes in. My commander, Ken, recognized how disappointed we were, and we had another week to go in the mission. So he had to keep our spirits up and make us productive again somehow. So one of the things he did for me was he recognized that he had to get me back in the game somehow. So we had some rocket firings to do on Columbia to change and adjust our orbit and rendezvous with the satellite. And so he let me, the mission specialist on board, not the pilot, not the commander, he had me sit in the seat and fire the rockets on Columbia, run down the checklist with him. And then I got to fly the space shuttle, which is not typically my job. So I'm at the controls of Columbia, and I get to fire the rockets and change our orbit. And all of that was just, wow, I get to be a rocket scientist, if you will, in real life. And so, I think he did deliberately to get me engaged and to give me a treat I ordinarily wouldn't have had. And it was a recognition. He saw my condition and wanted to bring me up. And that happened was we had both of us were, again, several days to recover from, and we had a CNN TV, and I introduced one of my graphs with something like, well, I hope my boss down there is listening and he'll give us another chance to do a spacewalk. And it was at the time, but we landed, we got out of Columbia on the runway in Florida, and there was my boss, the chief of the astronaut corps. And within a few minutes, he was right up next to both Tammy and me saying, hey, look, I know how badly this disappointment must have struck you. And I recognize that, and it's not fair. And he says, I'm going to do everything I can to get you guys another opportunity to do a spacewalk. And I'm working on it right now. I have a plan to get you up in space, maybe in about 9 months on a scheduled mission that has a need for a spacewalk. So I'm going to see if I can make that happen. And then he went away. But to Tammy and me, this was a tremendous lift to know that our boss had figured out what our mindset was in space, recognized the disappointment professionally. We weren't guaranteed another shot at this. He had no obligation to do that, yet he came up and said, I'm going to work very hard to get both of you back into space. Now, he didn't make it work in 9 months. I think it was about 3 years later when I finally got to do my spacewalks, but he was able to make that promise a reality. And both Tammy got up before I did. I got up on a separate mission that I just told you about with the Destiny Science Lab. And so tremendous boost for us. And I think that was because both of our supervisors, my commander and my astronaut chief, recognized what he could do to help his people. And they recognized that it wasn't obligated, it wasn't obligatory, but they thought that was within their power, and they realized they could get us back in the game that way. So I thought that was one of the best examples of leadership I'd ever seen, both in space and on the ground.
I love it. Thank you. I mean, that's intentionality, it's noticing, and it doesn't take much, right? That's the example that you gave. Really, it just highlights that it really doesn't take much for a leader to notice and take that extra step to make such a big difference. Thank you.
Yeah, and the chief who did that for us was Bob Cabana. He's like the deputy administrator at NASA right now. So he's gone on to a long and productive career because he's got that kind of people skill.
Yeah, I love it. So I could sit here and talk to you both all day. We have time for only one more question though. So Nadine, I'm going to ask to follow up with you on that trust question on LinkedIn so we can continue that conversation. But just as we wrap, we close out our time together. I would like to hear your thoughts on what advice you would give other leaders for how to lead in uncertain times when you know you don't have all the answers.
First of all, I'm still digesting what Tom was presenting. I mean, it's amazing.
That unintelligible, eh?
I love it though. I could listen for hours. So the advice, which honestly also relates to the trust part, passion, I already said it before, right? You have to have passion or nobody will follow you, or nobody will believe you, and nobody will trust you. The vision, that's almost the easy part. I think being genuine and being transparent, which means don't pretend to know you know everything because people can tell. And then this is how you lose the trust. So I think my advice is just, follow your passion and others will come along. Be genuine so others can trust you, and be transparent so that you're open to help and support. And that's how you build a team. Don't pretend that you know it all. It's okay to be to show signs of weakness, because this is, in times of uncertainty and times of crisis, we need to help each other. We need to empower each other. I think this is what Tom's story was about, the empowerment and then the collaboration. I hope that hits at least some nerves with whoever is listening.
That's wonderful. And Tom, I want to ask you that same question. So just as we close out, what advice would you give other leaders for how to lead in times of uncertainty when you don't have all the answers as a leader?
Well, we have to go back to our previous discussion of the generational gap. You've got all this young talent at a place like NASA, for example, and in the commercial space sector, places like Blue Origin and space, they're populated with young engineers who are working flat out to meet their goals. And so, NASA's from that entrepreneurial spirit in the commercial sector, but they have a lot of people as well in the NASA organization. They maybe have not experienced the losing the space shuttle Columbia back in 2003. They may have seen the movie Apollo 13, but they haven't lived it as part of the organization. So, NASA's challenge to lead is to inspire those people with a goal like return Americans to the moon and moving on to Mars eventually after that, but to do it with acceptance and recognition and acceptance of risk, but also with an aim towards success. And NASA has a very high bar for success. So I think one way you convey that as a leader is to let these people have their head, give them their free reign to introduce innovative solutions. That's certainly what's happening in the commercial space sector. And at NASA, I think that's a challenge for leaders to get their people to contribute even wild ideas and see which ones make the best sense. It's just because it's been done that way for a generation doesn't mean it has to be done that way in achieving this goal of returning to the moon. So, you've got to tell them it's a dangerous, risky business, and failure has real consequences, like you lose people's lives. But you also have to tell them that, we didn't succeed in the 1960s in going to the moon by being a very cautious, risk-averse organization. So let's encourage people to bring forward their best ideas. Prove to me as a leader that you've got the risks and benefits weighed properly, and then we'll discuss whether it's the right way to go forward. But you need to have that talent bring forth their best ideas, and you can't suppress that just because it wasn't done that way for the last generation. So leaders have to be brave enough to accept the risk of letting their people contribute.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Nadine and Tom, for being here to share your stories. I hope that our participants joining today are able to take away some helpful insights.